So it's 14 people.
Yeah, right.
All students or a very large mix of groups of people?
Also scholars, students, educators, just teachers, translators.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay.
As many as people we can reach, I think.
I did this about 3 weeks ago to a group in Mexico of teacher union leaders and students and academics. And at the end, there were 14,000 people throughout Latin America. So it was quite something. And then in the middle, there were technical problems, of course. So the sound went out. So I do not have capacity to sign. So
Okay. So
Okay.
we have Professor
Hi.
C.
Yeah.
And, Professor Knoll as well.
Okay.
I see Guy is there.
Guy is here, yes.
Hello. Hello, Michael.
Good to see you.
Hello, Guy.
Fatma, good to see you too.
Okay, Janet is here, you know.
Good. Hello, now I can see you, Janet. It's good to see you. I'd like to see you in Madison again, but we will have to use this for now.
So there are some more people coming. Maybe we can wait for a minute more.
It's fine.
Barbara's here, okay.
I see people's names, but some of them there's no picture. And Sarap, it's lovely to see you. So this is becoming partly a reunion. So this is quite nice.
It is one big union.
And Meta people is here too.
Good, good.
It's good. We are a big family.
One big reunion.
One big union, yes.
Very nice.
How's the weather in Madison, Michael?
90 degrees with the same humidity. That's Fahrenheit. We are sheltering at home.
Yeah.
As many people are.
Mm-hmm.
There's been many protests here still ongoing.
Yeah.
As Fatma knows, I had a case of pneumonia. So my resistance was low and I was unable to go to most of the protests, which was very frustrating. And now it's so hot that people are they're waiting till midnight to protest because at least it's not quite 90 degrees then. But it's been frustrating to say the least. So
I heard from friends in Chicago how terribly hot it is right now.
But we know from my beloved president that climate change is not a real thing. It's simply a leftist plot to keep us from understanding the importance of having a robust economy that creates more poverty. But aside from that.
Yeah. Aside from that, everything's okay.
What's it like with you?
Well, I'm in Tucson, Michael, and it's 109 degrees today, and we are really sheltering because of the tremendous danger we have here in Arizona.
Exactly. Yeah, I've heard from friends that, again, the opening up was the closing down of people's bodies in some ways.
Unbelievable. So we're just, everyone, it's so difficult.
Well, the appropriate vocabulary for this is murder, but it's slow.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. that fits.
And I prefer to use that term, actually. Make that point in my opening remarks. I think that governments right now throughout the world are engaged in an epistemological war, making it impossible for us to see what is really going on. But it is murder. You know, they know will die. So it is quite frightening. So.
Yeah. Okay, let's start slowly. Okay, dear participants, dear colleagues, dear students, dear scholars, educators, welcome to our Thursday Talks, Global Thursday Talks. Today we are hosting a big name in education, in critical education and critical theory, Michael Apple. He is a friend of Turkish people. He's a friend of Turkey, and we have been chatting a while ago, and he said he misses Turkey because he has been here many times for conferences, for intellectual talks, and he is one of the most translated authors into Turkish. And fortunately, we're having some of the translators here in this meeting. His several books were already translated, and there are a couple of articles published in Turkish too. I'm very honored. Michael, welcome. And now we are ready to talk about you and to listen to you. Welcome again. Welcome home.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Eda, floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. It's nice to see everyone again. I would like to go on and briefly introduce our host, Dr. Fatma Mızıkacı, and our distinguished speaker, Michael Apple. Dr. Fatma Mızıkacı specialized in curriculum and instruction, and she is currently an associate professor at Ankara University, and she has been recently hosting Global Thursday Talks on education. And Michael Apple is one of the leading educational theorists in the world and a public intellectual who is deeply committed to empowerment and transformation of people through education. He works on the relations between education and power. He has made major contributions to the fields of cultural politics, curriculum theory and research, and critical teaching and teacher education. He is the author of many works, including Can Education Change Society, Education and Power, Global Crisis, Social Justice and Education, and Democratic Schools. And Michael Apple is the professor of curriculum and instruction and educational policy studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Education. His books have been widely translated and gone into many editions, and I would like to show some of the editions in Turkish right now that we also enjoyed. Here.
Yeah, this is Democratic Schools, Michael.
That looks familiar.
Democratic Schools. Other one is Critical Pedagogy Interviews, kind of. And you know, the first one here on the left side, Neoliberalism and Education Policies. And the one in the middle, it's Can Education Change Society? And the last one is Education and Power. These are all translated and are, you know, in the list of reading sources in many graduate programs today. And thank you for your contribution, and also thank you to the translators, of course. It's a big work.
Yeah, we appreciate translation and translators' work a lot. And I would like to go over some, you know, basic principles for a better webinar. Thank you for showing up from different cities, institutions, and countries. It's a pleasure having this union, as we have mentioned before. Before we start, here are some overall reminders. Please stay mute and feel free to use the chat box to type your questions and comments. There will not be a question and answer part this time. because Professor Apple has another technical, conference.
Online.
Online conference. So, and he kindly accepted another, meeting, another event with us so that we can, hear the answers and comments about your questions. So our webinar will have Michael's talk, and Michael Apple will talk about coronavirus pandemic and its implications regarding education. The talk will take around an hour, and we will finish the meeting in like 70 minutes. So we would appreciate if you don't interrupt. And with that, I present you Professor Michael Apple.
Thank you. Well, it is a pleasure to be even virtually home in Turkey again. Some of you know I'm the former president of a teacher syndicate, and my first interactions in Turkey were with various teacher unions. And I do feel cut off from Turkey, since Turkey has been profoundly important in my trying to understand what strong states look like. I don't want to see the world just through the eyes of the United States, and also what it means to have rightist mobilizations that are also deeply connected to conservative religious mobilizations. And you know that that's part of my analysis and part of my arguments over time. So in some ways, it is both a pleasure to see some of you and to have this reunion in some ways, but it's sad because I don't want to talk about these kinds of things. I do, obviously, but I'm sad that this is what we're going to talk about is happening all over the world. I am in contact with people in Hungary, in Poland, in Brazil, in many, many places, in Kenya. And it is a very, very dangerous time. And in my mind, we must not romanticize this, and I don't want to be rhetorical. Too much critical pedagogic work throws words at it that is not based on serious political economy or serious understanding of the lives of teachers. And as someone who spent a lot of years teaching in rural and urban areas in the United States and elsewhere, I prefer that we ground our work in the daily lives of what is happening in these institutions called schools, okay? And in the lives of teachers, administrators, and academics who are also in a school in some ways. So the plan would be something like this. I want to use the United States as a lever to pry loose, to open up a discussion about what the implications are, political, economic, in terms of teachers' lives, kids' lives, and parents' lives of COVID. And then rehearse some of the arguments I make in Can Education Change Society about who is the we and what can we do about that. I want to be honest, this is an hour, and I will try and remember to talk slowly, since unlike many of you, I only speak English. I am the product of the belly of the beast of the United States. And even though we have always been a multilingual nation, we refuse to understand that. So I was taught 2 years of high school Spanish. I have forgotten all of it, which is an immense tragedy. And I know a few words in Turkish that I will not say because they're not very clean words. I normally have say those after some beer. So after we are done, I will have a beer and we will turn this off, and you will not hear me say the words in Turkish that I do know. You'll forgive my jokes, but my last name is Apple, and I spent 3 years in my early years of teaching as a substitute teacher under contract with the state, and every day I would go to a different classroom. And every day I would have to introduce myself to children and say, "Good morning, children, my name is Mr. Apple." And they would laugh for 4 hours. So I learned that my teaching style often has some humor, but let me remind you that there is nothing funny about what we're going to talk about today. which is the complicity of the state and education in the murder of children, the murder of elderly people, and putting teachers' lives at risk constantly. All right? So with those beginning remarks, let me go on. So I want to talk again about neoliberal policies and other policies and the formation of a new hegemonic bloc. Let me mention what I mean by that and then move on to more practical kinds of things. In most nations of the world that have this odd combination, what I call conservative modernization, there is a new alliance that is using education for its own purposes. It's what, again, I call conservative modernization. This has four groups who have formed an alliance, and we can find this group in Turkey, certainly in the United States, and in many, many other nations. Certainly in Greece as well right now. The first is what we call neoliberalism. They believe that there's one simple thing about the world: private is good and public is bad. And the task of schools is to efficiently produce workers and the kind of knowledge that will support one of the world's great unequal economies. The second group is a vision not of a weak state that is funded by, that funds, if you will, capital. Strong state over knowledge and values. And this is what we call neoconservatives. They believe one simple thing: the problem is that too many minoritized people, too many women, too many progressives have now taken over the curriculum. And we must restore what it means to be Turkish or American, quotes, or Brazilian as the core element of a curriculum. And I'll come back to these because COVID provides an opportunity for these groups to mobilize. But this is a group that wants a very, very strong state. It is behind many of the increasing prison populations. It is often quite racist. It is anti-Kurdish in many nations. It is anti-immigrant in other nations. There is a third group that I want to call, following Stuart Hall, authoritarian populists. Now, populism can be good or bad, but this is a group that says the people must decide, but there's good people and bad people. Good people are conservative religiously. They know what is right. God speaks to them, but not to other people. We can see this in the formation of madrasas of particular kinds, of state funding for religious schools increasingly, in this notion that the separation between the secular state and religious forms is part of the problem. So in Turkey, this is extraordinarily powerful and getting more powerful, as you know. Now, a reminder, I will often not speak about Turkey. One of the reasons I have agreed to come back for a second session is so that you teach me about whether what I'm saying fits. So again, I apologize for not being able to answer questions, but that's why we're having the second session. So this group is behind the fastest growing schooling in the United States right now, which is not private schooling, it is homeschooling. It is not for-profit schools, it is homeschooling. It is not madrasas even. These are people, 4 to 5 million people, who have pulled their children even out of religious schools and are schooling them at home and creating the gated community of the home. So I want to come back to this because we are beginning to see increasingly in many, many nations a rapid growth of homeschooling for religious reasons as well, and that will be a site of for-profit schooling powerful. There's a fourth group that would usually not vote for Erdogan or Bolsonaro. These are people who vote what we call social democrat. And this is a group of new managerialists, a group of the professional middle class And they believe one simple thing. If it moves in classrooms, measure it. And if you don't have a classroom, make certain that the teacher is teaching very efficiently. And we must have even more control of the curriculum so that we know what is going on. And we'll see with COVID-19, there's increasing pressure on controlling the curriculum, on controlling actually what goes on in the home as well as the school. Okay? Now this is odd because this group of people normally does not vote for religious conservatism, but they provide the technical expertise for doing distance education, for the measurement that goes with it, for the national and regional examinations. And they are often, again, what Stephen Ball would call the performance icons. These are the people where performativity becomes important. Okay, so that's the background. That's the group that I think will take advantage of these kinds of things as an alliance. So, COVID enters. And as you know very well, it is not only a health crisis, but it's a crisis even more in economic, ideological, and political terms. And we can't understand what is happening in education unless we sometimes shift the focus outside of education, since the transformations in schools are part of a larger set of ideological, social, and economic transformations. A transformation of what counts as the family, transformation of what counts as a good school, a good curriculum, and a good teacher, and profoundly a movement of what I want to call an epistemological fog to make the inequalities that are created by the state's response to COVID invisible. And part of the task of critical educators, even if we can't change what is happening now, is to make the invisible visible. That is to show how this is mobilizing and creating some of the worst inequalities that your nation and my own has ever seen. It's a step backwards in powerful ways. So let me use the United States. What's happening now? Well, what we're seeing is a mass destruction of the public sphere, a change so that democracy is private. So if we were to have a discussion about a democratic public school, communities would have a voice, parents, but not only parents would have a voice, teachers would have a voice, students would have a voice, and it would be a collective understanding of what counts as democracy. And behind this vision, one of the effects of COVID is the rapid transformation, I shouldn't say a slow but steady transformation in the neoliberal agenda of making it okay that the home becomes the site of education. Since there will be no physicality, no bodies in school, even though what I would like to call our Emperor Donald, I will not call him the president. He is a resident. He resides occasionally in the White House. Resident Donald, our emperor now, wants all schools to open again quickly so that more children and teachers become infected. So this will make that seem more democratic, but it's actually quite a destructive form. So there's an ideological transformation going on that's quite powerful. An ideological transformation that makes democracy now individual choice, and democracy is now desocialized. It is individuals making choices, even though they don't have a choice because the schools are closed. All right? So the closing in schools in most parts of the United States has created huge disparities and effects. So as we know, and this is going on in so many countries, it would take the hour just to list them, that poor and working class children often get little or no schooling whatsoever. And there's been a move to a hybrid form of homeschooling in many nations, with digital media replacing the schools. And this requires resources that poor schools and poor families simply don't have. To take one example, in the city of Milwaukee in the United States, the largest city in my own state of Wisconsin, or the same would be said in Phoenix, or in New York, or Chicago, or in rural areas, approximately 30% of the students do not have a computer and do not have an internet connection. So it becomes a fiction that we are distributing this. In rural areas, there is no internet. So as an example, my younger son is a school principal, and up until last year was a school principal in a rural school district, a secondary school in the northern part of my own state, a town of 1,500 people. No one had an internet connection. There were no wires, none. If you're an indigenous person on what we unfortunately call reservations in the United States, in Taos Pueblo, in New Mexico, or any place near Tucson, as an example, these reservations have been under attack technologically, economically, racially, for centuries. The internet doesn't work. The technology is not there, and the schools are underfunded, often understaffed, etc. So we want to see what is happening. It requires this utopia that has never existed. And certainly if we looked in the nation of Turkey, in those areas that have a high minoritized population, a large population of immigrants from Syria, a large population of people who are poor and working class, who have lost their jobs, we will find that this is simply an impossibility to have schooling as we know it. So it assumes resources, internet connections, computers, even cell phones, and even more importantly, it has an ideological vision of what the home looks like and what family structures look like. It assumes that there is a place in an apartment or a home where a student or in a family of 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 children, that there is actually a place to do the schoolwork. Now, I grew up very, very poor as a child in a working class and immigrant community. And in my apartment, we had a small apartment, very small, about the size of the office I am in right now, divided into a kitchen, a place with a couple of chairs, and 1 bedroom. Okay? There was no place to study, none whatsoever. So there was this ideologized space. And anyone who knows what it's like in the poorer neighborhoods of your own nation as well will understand this. So this is simply not available in rural homes, etc. And the effects on a large number of children who are invisible, that is, homeless children, are even worse. So in the city of New York, for instance, there's approximately 100,000 children who are homeless. Most nations have similar figures. So what we are doing is saying you can have schooling, we can call it distance education, but you are living in a shelter or on the street or in some places in tents where there's not even electricity. So in my own city, the city of Madison, Wisconsin, which is one of the wealthiest cities in the state of Wisconsin, there are approximately 2,000 children who are homeless. Many of them live on the streets or are in shelters where they cannot distance themselves from other people who are infected. So again, the virus then also has an effect in ways that are invisible, where we have this vision of what it means to be human. And those students and families who are homeless or very poor are literally made invisible. It doesn't just desocialize schooling, it desocializes powerfully the ability of people to be part of being human. They're ignored. They're simply not seen. It is the politics of invisibility. And that effect is absolutely central. So it makes the bodies themselves, as well as the spaces that they inhabit or they don't have, invisible as well. It also means, as children are sent back to the home, that there's a lack of food for children. And this has become a major crisis as well in many, many nations. So we have what are called full-service schools, where now breakfast and lunch and after school, before the children go home at, say, 5 o'clock at night, they are fed 3 meals a day. It is the only food they have. And since so many people now are out of work, are losing their apartments or where they live, there is no food in the home. And the food distribution centers of churches and mosques and elsewhere are running out of food. So the distance education is also a distancing of one's body in a different way. There is no food distribution for children. As I hope I'm being clear. So I want us to understand that all of this means that there are serious repercussions on what we call democratic and critical teaching. And we can't say what should we do unless we look at the very materiality of what we're doing it in and with. And unless we are deeply honest, no amount of quoting from one of my close friends who is no longer here, Paulo Freire, no amount of quotes from him, no matter how brilliant and beautiful a person he was, and how dedicated he was, can help us unless we understand, as he did, what is the reality that is being faced? What does it mean to talk about inequalities, exploitation, and oppression? And if the words are just a theoretical agenda, it's not sufficient. You'll forgive me as I get a little emotional about this, but as someone who grew up very poor, you'll forgive me, but I sort of understand this in my body as well. Okay? All right. Now, the pressures on parents then become important, and this is where we can't just talk about class, we have to talk about gender and race. The pressures on parents, especially mothers, given the patriarchal structuring of domestic labor, are frighteningly intense. Rates of child abuse and violence against women in the home are increasing in every nation that is going through this. These things are made even worse given the necessity for adults and children to earn enough to survive in a time of pandemic. So many people have become, in China, street vendors again, even though they are illegal. They're selling anything that they can. Okay? Think about what it must be like when someone must be home with a large family, dealing with children, and has to make a choice between going to somewhere to earn enough money to survive and knowing that the only schooling their children will get will be if they're lucky enough to have a computer and they have to be there. So this is creating a moral choice where no matter what, parents lose. And the effect on mothers, especially in conservative nations where conservative religious forms are powerful, where the idea is that all domestic labor and all labor that's done in the home is the role not of the man, but it is God's will that women must be those people who are taking care of children. So again, this is where, again, the conservative religious movements not only mobilize this, but make it even more powerful in its effects, not just on children, but on the daily life of women. And unless we understand that women are doing often two kinds of labor, the paid labor outside the home and the unpaid and often unrecognized domestic labor, that this is increasing the emotional cost and physical danger of women and children in many ways. Okay. So much of this is going on with these hybrid forms of homeschooling. Now, this has another major effect that is more progressive. I mentioned that food is not being made available in schools because the schools are closed. But right now, in many parts of the United States, in Brazil and elsewhere, teachers and parents and community activists have organized as an alliance for food distributions. And this alliance may last. That's actually quite crucial. That is, this provides a space for building alliances that are counter-hegemonic. And I don't mean this to be rhetorical. Right now, we are witnessing in many, many places in the United States, in slums and favelas in Brazil, in many places in South Africa. It may be going on in Malta as well, since I see that Peter Mayo is among us. Hello, Peter. There is now a mobilization that cuts across even ideological boundaries, where parents and communities are mobilizing with teachers who have an ethical commitment to their children to support with Black Lives Matter movements, for instance, that the children are being fed, and mobilizing against the violence against women. So I want to take that seriously. When this is over, if it is ever over, we want to ask, does this provide a space for alliances to support teachers at a time when many, many governments and many authoritarian leaders are saying anybody can teach, we don't need teachers, we don't need teacher syndicates. So does this open a possibility that we don't think enough about? I'll come back to that later. Okay. Now there's other major effects that come out of this. The isolation of people in the home and the isolation of teachers that is going on with this does mean in most places right now that there's a loss of momentum, loss of mobilization in building and defending social movements to challenge state and local conservative and neoliberal policies. Now, this is very, very important. We know one thing: teachers and administrators do not change schools by themselves. Let me repeat that, because it is tough as an educator for me to say it in public. Teachers and administrators by themselves cannot make large-scale transformations of educational policies that extend beyond their schools. Now, don't misunderstand me. In the life of schools and teachers, it is crucial to interrupt every day one's experiences. But we do know that teachers, as part of social movements, larger movements of parents and activists, together put pressure on governments by saying, no, you can't do this anymore, and we will fight for alternatives. That's the history of Turkey's teachers' unions in many ways. Now, when you are no longer physically together, when you can't even have lunch together, when Zoom gets tiring, when you've got so many other responsibilities now with domestic labor, given that, will in fact there be this momentum for building the alliances between teachers and communities? What will happen to teacher syndicates when teachers are no longer together every day? And that to me is crucial, because teachers in syndicates are absolutely central to changing curriculum, to defending the rights of teachers for pay, for healthcare, for respect. So isolating people in their homes makes it much harder for social movements to build. And that creates even more difficulty for parent mobilizations and community mobilizations. So I'm a pretty strong political activist, and this is a time of Black Lives Matter in the United States. And I'm usually speaking at these things, mobilizing with them, learning from them, marching, giving money. So as an example, I get no money from my books. Even things like democratic schools or ideology and curriculum, which have sold over 1 million copies. The money goes to community mobilizations. I have a salary, I can live on it. Okay, but I am now prevented because I'm sheltering at home from joining the mobilizations. So even if we say somebody like me, whose life depends on, am I doing something or is it just am I writing? Though writing is crucial, right? I don't want to diminish that. But we again have to say, what is the effect on daily life of these kinds of things? Now, we are also isolating youth. And what does this mean, since youth mobilizations are absolutely crucial? And if even youth are sheltering at home, what does it mean for youth mobilizations as well? Okay, now let's get to the idea that we can do education digitally. In today and yesterday's New York Times, there are articles about how op-ed pieces on good education demands distance education. It's the new in thing. Every time someone says this, I want them to be in charge of a group of kids without a computer and see if they survive. But let me go on. So curriculum and teaching now increasingly are delivered electronically, and that means they become standardized even more. The home is increasingly seen by media and large publishing houses then as an even greater site for the generation of profit, as even more things become commodified. So before, the schools were seen as sites of profit under neoliberal regimes, as more and more teachers didn't have time to build curriculum, or the state tests said, I'm sorry, we don't want teachers doing this. You have to prepare students for the all-important high school entrance examination. But now, even more, those are published by Pearson and Company or other large multinational corporations. And with distance education, we are already seeing that these large corporations are hiring people to ghostwrite curriculum, to do all kinds of things to make certain that they make a profit off of the distance. So as increasingly the curriculum becomes commodified, the home then becomes, like the school, a site of profit generation. So something is good if it makes a profit. Whether it connects to the real lives of parents and children is beside the point. So this subsidizes, in many ways, neoliberal ideological forms and subsidizes and makes more legitimate the idea of democracy is the gated home. It is the family. It is not the community, since community is diminished. And that would mean that teachers lose their autonomy and they lose even the right, limited even that it was, to teach counter-hegemonic and critically democratic material. And just as importantly, to have the ability to connect what they teach and how they teach it to the lives and cultures of students and their communities. So let's think about the population right now of Turkey. Turkey is in motion. What counts as Turkish culture has always been multiple. It is a fiction that there is one Turkish culture, in the same way there's a fiction that there's one Greek culture or one US culture. Culture is not a noun, it's a verb. So millions of people from Syria have now moved to Turkey to protect their lives and their children. If I am a teacher, I must deal with it. We know what has happened with Kurdish and other minorities in the history of Turkey. I will let you deal with the politics of that statement. I think people know where my sympathies are. But what does this mean then if all curricula are digitized and I am faced with, if I'm lucky enough to have a school and a classroom, with something that has no relationship to their lived experience, their hopes, their fears, their language, their dreams, etc. What does that mean for teachers? What does it mean for the lives of children and their futures? And good teaching, we know, critically democratic teaching begins with that. It doesn't end with it. It starts with that. With whom am I working? Okay. Now that means that critical pedagogy becomes almost impossible. The key word there is almost. Since no teacher is a puppet, no administrator is really a puppet, no one got into teaching and education to make money. If you did, I hate to inform you that that dream has never been true. So we must ask then, what are the material conditions for doing critical education? Is it possible? I'll come back to that in a second. Now, this also leads to what I want to call an intense epistemological war. So the subjects that can be more easily commodified and packaged for profit will be stressed even more today. Now, many teachers are saying this is not teaching. It's simply not teaching. But what it has done increasingly is to make it even more difficult for teachers to keep the skills that they have developed. So critical pedagogy is not simply rhetorical, it requires skills. It requires that we teach each other what works and what doesn't. And to the extent, it's a bit like, well, I'm a former, let me use a slightly masculinist example, even though I play basketball on a shared men's and women's, if you'll forgive that binary, team. I hurt my leg a few years ago and could not play basketball for 6 months. I'm supposed to be relatively skilled for an old white guy in playing basketball. When I got back on a basketball court, it was as if I had never played ever before in my life. It was embarrassing. Now, many of my friends who are engaged in knitting, that is making sweaters and other kinds of things and clothes for their children, who have broken their hands and can no longer do that for 3 or 4 months, tell exactly the same story. When they were called upon to sew or to do things like that, or to make aesthetic forms, they had to relearn the skills, and it took a very, very long time for them to do it. What happens to teaching when the skills that are counter-hegemonic, skills of connecting to children's daily lives, connecting to communities, connecting to the social transformations that you want to come from a critical education, that you don't have the capacity to do them anymore, you lose them. So the long-term effect of this may be to make critical pedagogic work rhetorical. That is, not only do the material conditions make it harder, but the conditions of one's own labor, of the art form and skills of actually doing it, of remembering how it's done, may slowly atrophy and be lost. And that means that even if we can't practice them in schools now, because we're doing distance, speaking to each other, sending videos to each other, using the distance connections that are now being used for the neoliberal and conservative agendas, we must be able to use that to support each other and to continue to keep our skill levels and artistry levels in counter-hegemonic forms alive and worth doing. So we are being presented actually with a technology that oddly enough may make it somewhat easier for us to connect with each other. And unless we become skilled at using that, we will lose those skills powerfully. Okay, so the lives of teachers, although not just teaching, one of the things that is happening with teachers as well as parents, many teachers are parents. So just as parents are now having to do dual duty, teachers must engage in domestic labor and at the same time do their duty as teachers electronically. Well, when I speak to my friends who are deeply involved in this, they say we are going crazy. One of my favorite quotes is, "We didn't even have time to go to the bathroom, that my life has become so intense. I'm trying to work with my classroom electronically, and my kids want my attention." That materiality of wanting to be an ethical and caring parent and an ethical and caring educator often is contradictory. And a number of teachers in the United States have lost their jobs, and they have mobilized to fight against it. And a number of cities now has made it illegal to have teachers be fired because of this. Because teachers said, "I'm sorry, I can't do the lesson today with my classroom because my kids are sick." And they were said, "Well, you have a choice. You can be a teacher and we'll send you a paycheck, or you'll be fired. It's your choice. Your kids, find a way of dealing with this. Why should we pay you when you're not working?" So this, oddly enough, has now created mobilizations among teachers to have teachers defend their autonomy. One thing we should always remember is this is not just one way where neoliberal, COVID-driven stuff wins. As Marx and others reminded us, capitalism is contradictory. And one of the effects is that this opens spaces for counter-hegemonic work. And the fact that some teachers are being told, make a choice, your children or your job. And they collectively mobilized and said, that is a choice we will not accept. You can't tell me I can't go into the school and my kids can't be in the school, and then say, if I care for my kids, that I no longer have a job. So again, this counter-hegemonic possibility is growing. Okay. Now, in the midst of this, there are other things that are going on. The economic crisis means that many states will look for ways to save money, and it's going to be much harder for teachers and other educators to defend their jobs and to secure benefits. So one of the hidden effects would be not just teachers and teaching, but the things that unions are so necessary for, syndicates are so necessary for. Many places, for instance, as people lose their jobs and are unemployed, the money that people will pay in taxes no longer goes to the state. Now that is a crisis of immense proportions. What will be cut? Healthcare, social workers, teachers. Money will not be cut for the support of the neoliberal agenda. It will not be cut for the support of businesses. It will not be cut for the building of new state-supported madrasas. It will be cut for public things. And what that means is that we have to face the fact that teachers may lose crucial benefits like healthcare, class sizes may rise, things like time to plan will be lost, And it may lead to further attacks on teacher unions. And we are seeing that right now. So we need not to wait for those things to happen. We need to mobilize around that now. Critical teaching is not just one teacher in a setting with children or adults. It is collective. It is mobilizing. Okay. A couple of other things. One of the other long-term effects that is growing in the United States and in England and Germany, and you'll have to tell me whether this is growing in Turkey, but it is growing oddly enough in China right now, which surprises me because China is about as top-down and state-controlled as you can possibly have, and that is the growth of homeschooling. Now, I mentioned before that approximately 4 to 5 million children in the United States are being homeschooled. The official data say 2 to 3 million. That's wrong, since many people are counted as in public schools if their children are part of a sports team organized by the school, but none of the schooling is done in the school. So the curriculum is religious and it's in the home. 80% of homeschoolers are doing this for conservative religious reasons or conservative political reasons. So even though the school's commitment officially in the United States and many other nations is to anti-racism, to diversity, to be anti-homophobic, to the creation of critical citizens, all of that is in our goals. It's often rhetorical, but it's much less likely in homeschooling. Excuse me. I'm hoping that this is raki. I doubt whether it is. I fear it's water. It is water. Okay. So it is much less likely in the conditions of homeschooling. One of the effects of COVID is the normalization of homeschooling, with parents saying it was bad, but I can't afford to pay my rising taxes now. My job is insecure. So I'm going to school my child at home. And there are large numbers of people now who are saying that. And this also cuts across ideological lines. The fastest growing and statistically population in the United States doing homeschooling are two groups: conservative evangelical parents who say the school is a site of secular danger. I quote from one of the most radical of them: teachers are tools of the devil. That makes me a little nervous. The second group are Black and brown people, minoritized people, who don't like Donald Trump at all, who know that they're being hurt. They may participate in Black Lives Matter demonstrations, but they are very worried about schooling for their children. And they do not want, they now are even more conscious of how racist the school system can be. They will keep their children at home. So this is puzzling now. These are people I want to support. I march with them. Right? I donate the royalties of my books to their organizations. At the same time, however, they too may want to support homeschooling. Now, this means that a neoliberal identity will be formed. That is what is called possessive individualism. That is, the home and the family is the limit of my social consciousness. Now, that's also true already for many white people. It's increasing. So if we normalize homeschooling, it means that it's seen as legitimate. Yet if I'm correct, and I write about this in a book called Educating the Right Way, with 80% of homeschoolers being there for very conservative reasons, they do not want, even rhetorically, a vision that immigrants are good, anti-racism, anti-homophobia, anti-patriarchal forms, a much more open curriculum. They don't want that. And what we are doing then is, so to them, the secular world is a site of danger. And that's already strong in Turkey. So what happens when we now make homeschooling the legitimate form? What happens to people's identities? And that means it will be even harder to mobilize around critical kinds of things, because the ideological forms that are accepted as the only legitimate ideological forms are possessive individualism. As long as my child does well, I don't have to work hard and worry about the larger community. The community for me will be the mosque, the church, and the home even more. Now, this is very worrisome. Let me end with some possibilities, though. I've mentioned some. I've undoubtedly depressed everyone. Let me remind you again of what I said before. In the midst of all this, there are mobilizations going on. No one is a puppet. Teachers are using the technology that they are getting that they didn't have before. Parents are using Zoom in ways that are unheard of by these groups of people who just want efficient schooling that's cost effective. So Black parents are in fact doing anti-racist mobilization. Teachers are doing counter-hegemonic work. The intellectual labor and emotional labor that parents are having to do now means that there are now growing understanding, massively growing understanding of the importance of teachers' work. So before, people like Trump were mobilizing in anti-school and especially anti-teacher and anti-teacher union ways. Bolsonaro in Brazil has an attack on teachers, an attack on the curriculum, an attack. They want to actually almost take away the citizenship of Paulo Freire. The Congress, the Parliament of Brazil has legislation to take away the awards, the honorary doctorates, everything of Paulo Freire. And anyone who supports him is risking losing their job now. So all of that is going on, but in the same time, we are seeing increasingly that these authoritarian rulers are losing support as parents and communities are understanding now how much hard emotional and intellectual labor it is to be a teacher, to be an administrator. So paradoxically, the same forces that are making it so hard to be a critical and democratic teacher are creating a situation in which teachers are gaining more respect and parents are mobilizing with teachers to support teachers in schools. Now that's absolutely central, because it means we are not starting from zero. In the midst of this, powerful mobilizations and a new understanding are also about, are being progressively built. And part of our task is to take leadership and mobilize with these groups. And that means we have to learn how to talk in ways that for many of us who are very fine intellectuals and public intellectuals, we have to keep going on our efforts to be understandable. That is, we have to learn how to speak in different ways. So as an example, when I am working with my PhD students and in what is called my Friday seminar, which has people from all over the world speaking multiple languages, And I quote from Marx or Gramsci or Foucault or Palafreri. They say, give me more. If I'm working with, giving a talk at a protest rally with a group of parents or a group of teachers who are saying, Michael, here's my curriculum. How do I get some of this electronically made legitimate? And I quote from Foucault, or I quote from the Prison Notebooks, one of my favorite books. Their eyes get a little glossy and glassy. So there's a task here, not to be anti-intellectual at all, never. The key word is praxis. How do I combine theory and practice together? But that means I must put myself in a position where I'm in interaction with the teachers who will be called upon to do this. And that means I can't simply be at the university. It also means that I must be deeply connected to journals in the United States like Rethinking Schools, where academics and children and teachers and administrators and community organizers all write for each other. Now, that means that we have certain tasks. So I want to close now, knowing I have I've tried to do, I teach a course in critical pedagogy. You've now had the whole course in 57 minutes. I apologize for trying to do all of this together. So again, what we will have to do is the next time, which I hope will be soon, I welcome comments. I welcome criticism. Frary was clear when he said, any teacher who is not a learner is not a good teacher. So I welcome being taught by you the next time we get together. And with that, you'll forgive me, I must leave very soon. I hope I've been helpful. Again, I hope that your struggles are more successful as time goes on. So I will say goodbye to Fatma and Eda and my other friends that I recognize from your names here. And I will speak to all of you, I hope, again soon.
Okay.
So,
Michael, thank you so much. This was very, very good, really. It was a summary of the whole class. This is what we are honored to have your class. But there will be next time with you. And to say a last word, the keyword you said, the keyword is praxis. Can we count this community, this digital community, as a praxis or a part of praxis, do you think?
definitely, it has to be. This is an example of using the media that we have been given to try and deal with a crisis in ways that build communities and also create a learning community that is deeply committed socially. That's where we begin. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank
Okay.
you. Have a wonderful
everyone.
day, have a wonderful seminar.
Thank
See
you.
you next time. See you
Very
soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna ask the rest of participants to stay more, to ask your questions to Michael, because we're gonna collect the questions, comments, and critiques, as he himself stated. You can write your questions in the chat section, because there will be next time with him. And then it will be maybe more interactive with a smaller group. I don't know if you want to stay more, 10 more minutes here, you can stay and you can just add your comments, critiques, and questions to Michael's presentation here. Otherwise, those who are leaving, I want to thank you to join us. And next week, we are having another speaker from Germany. And following week, we are having another speaker from Turkey. And then in August, we are having some surprise names. Stay with us. There will be surprises here. Thank you for your
Fatma Hocam,
participation.
can I say something, Fatma Hocam?
Yes, yes.
Can I say? I think you need to announce this more effectively. It is not easy to see it. I don't know what you are going to do.
Yes.
Maybe you can use Twitter also.
Yes, you're right, Janet. You know, we are so amateur, and you know, we are not very good at technology and social media. We created some social media platforms, but maybe you help us. I don't know.
I don't know. Actually, I'm not good, but it was hard to see it actually.
Okay, thank you. We will think about that.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful talk. Of course, we miss Michael and look forward to next speech.
Okay, thank you for your participation.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Janet. Take care. Bye. Okay, we are having some questions here. Yeah, higher education. Okay, we are taking notes of your questions. Okay, Noel, you give a cue.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
This is like magic to me, just to see friends. Just to see friends, to see, see Hassan and Nadia there and everybody else. And hey, I mean, this is like magic. This is terrific. Hi.
Hi. And we all get to hear this wonderful speaker together.
It was a tremendous talk.
Yes.
What a talk that was.
Yes.
Powerful and moving. Thanks again for doing this work. Eda, Fatma, all you guys who pull this us all together.
Okay, thank you, Guy. Also, you are still contributing to this initiative. You know, we are just amateurs, and we started this initiation with the amateur spirit, and we want to keep it non-academic, non-standard, and just keeping the community together, and contributing to our intellectual hungerness.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Hasan Hocam, Peter, would you like to say something? Peter Mayo was also with us, and Peter keeps contributing us. We still in very close contact with him, and it's getting bigger. Our big union is getting bigger and bigger with you. Thank you for this.
Fatma.
Yes, Peter.
What is interesting is in my country, there was an item which made the news. It was a big issue, a survey was carried out amongst teachers who had to, as Michael was saying, move online like we did. I'm talking about schools now. And when it comes to government schools, which takes up most of the working class people go to government schools in the majority. I'm not saying there aren't working class people who attend private schools or publicly funded church schools, because, you know, I mean, however, the majority are there. They discovered that out of 25 students in a classroom, only 5 would participate continually online. You know, the whole idea of playing truant and playing, you know, like, if I can avoid it, I'll avoid schooling. Well, this was like a wonderful opportunity for people who, you know, like, they don't feel that kind of, that sense of intimacy that you would have in your face-to-face education inside a space with all the problems that there are, but you've got friends, there's a counterculture, you're having a good time, possibly making fun of the teacher. You may have a very good teacher, which I hope is the majority, you know, who can keep you. The fact that we've gone virtual must have been a pretext for many kids to miss schooling. Now, there are 101 reasons for this. And I think Michael, well, I'm saying it metaphorically. Michael did, from what I heard, because I connected late, I couldn't find the link. Michael does mention one of the big difficulties is it assumes that everybody has access to high-powered computers. Now, as that in itself is already a hurdle. Even if you have the best computer in the world, I think the problem is that there are issues of access to computers. And let's say everybody has an access to a computer. All the social issues come in. It's not easy to be educated at home if you live in a very small space at home, shared by the mother has to work from home. The father has to work from home. You only have a few rooms, and you are lucky if you're lucky enough. You have one computer terminal, on which there are so many demands. People who want to work. You have brothers, siblings, etc. You only have one computer terminal. I mean, that compounds the whole issue for many families in terms of substituting schooling with working online. So, you know, I mean, we've been questioning why people are not, you have the statistic we found in our country. I wonder if it's also happening abroad. I'd be surprised if it isn't, actually, because you know, we're an island up to a certain extent. We're full of people and we have the same issues. Is also the pressure which is placed on your standard of living to be able to keep up with something which often takes place outside the home. So people want homeschooling. Of course, middle-class people can do that. Class comes into this. But the other thing is that even being maintained at home is very difficult for for many families. They don't have the space. They will be lucky to have one computer. So much pressure. That's it, you know. So I think the class divide, it's never gone away. It's always been there, but now it's stark in your face. And you also have problems with governments. Our government. I know there's a lot of poverty in the country. I helped the former president of the republic. We in programs against poverty, but we get told by governments that, you know, like, we are giving a bad image to the country, as if, you know, like, there isn't poverty. They want to hide this under the carpet, but it is there. Poverty will never go away. It is a class issue. It is a structural issue. long as we have a capitalist society, you're going to have poverty. I mean, this is an illusion that we're going to have full-time employment, 100% employment. We never have that. It's within the capitalist system itself. So there's so many things to say.
Yes.
We live in a crazy system called capitalism, which is crazy. It has to really go through crisis to support it, to be supported, and the generation will lose because of that crisis. So all these issues come into play. And then we talk about, you know, like teaching from home. Teaching from home is the best you can do, but if this is going to be for the long haul, God help us.
Okay. Thank you, Peter, for your contribution. Okay, if you don't mind, I want to close the session today. We will be together soon, next Thursday. Take care until then. Have a nice day and have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye.